Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Ben Week's Bonanza Pilot. Today I have notes.
My name is Stan. We're going to pre-flight this airplane and then we're going to take you up in the air. So sit back and fasten your seatbelt. That's about it. Come on, let's go flying. Okay, cut.
Near clunk. So welcome back to part 2 of the Demystifying the early VTail Bonanza series that I am doing here on YouTube. This will be a video that will be shorter than the last one. I'll link it up here if you haven't seen that. But I have a few things to clarify and then a couple things I didn't mention or that weren't available on the other airplane. So this is my dad's B-35 1950 B-35 Bonanza that I will be kind of showing a few things on. Some of the similarities between it and the D model, and then also some of the differences. Like for instance, this has the electric prop, which is one of the other options, whereas the D model in the previous video had the Hartzell hydraulic prop. So I'll just clarify a few things. This should not be as long as the last video. And then in part 3, we're gonna go take off, do some flying, talk through some actual flying procedures. Okay, let's see here. What have we got? First up is electric prop. Let me open the cowling here real quick. Hold up. Okay, sorry about that. I forgot to open the cowling. So this is my dad's B-35 Bonanza. It has the E185-11 engine. You probably can't read the serial or the data plate on it. So this is about a 2,000 hour engine, 2,100 hour engine since major overhaul. Cylinders, I want to say, have 1,000 or so hours on them, except for one, the back number 2 cylinder that had been changed about the first 30 hours of flight time. So anyways, I'm going to cover kind of just like in the last video. We'll go prop to tail. This should be a lot faster. I'm not going to walk through every single system like I did before, but I will cover a few things. This should go a lot shorter. So this is the electric prop, 84-inch Beech 215 electric propeller. So this is not what came standard on the original Bonanzas. They actually came with a wooden propeller, the R200 Beech, or the Roby 200 I think was the company, or the 200 was the propeller, whatever. It was a wooden prop. They eventually went to aluminum blades. I want to say with the C35 is when they started offering the Beech 215 aluminum. It was an 88-inch prop, which had the extra tip. A lot of them have since been cut down, or in this case, these were 278 blades that were used. On the 225 engines, you're supposed to only use 84-inch because at 2650 RPMs, the tips, I guess, will break the speed of sound. That's what I've heard. They're loud, very loud. Hey yo, Ben from the future here. Far be it from me to be a purveyor of incorrect information, but when I am talking about the 84-inch propeller and the E225-8 engine, I believe I'm actually incorrect here regarding using the 84-inch propeller on the 225 engines. I was led to believe that that was the case, that you were only allowed to run the 84-inch on the 225s because of apparently the extra 50 RPMs that are allowable with the 225-8 would cause the 88-inch propeller to the tips to break the speed of sound. Come to find out, that does not appear to be correct, and if you dig into the actual A-777 type certificate for the 35 series Bonanzas, you will find that actually the 88-inch prop is allowable. The limits tend to be how cut down the propellers can be, with I think the 225 being allowable down to 86 inches in some cases. Now, I'm not going to go into too much nitty-gritty detail for this video because it's not necessary, but if you are confused about what your airplane or what your engine airframe combination is allowed to use, I welcome you to go dig into the A777 type certificate, and all of your questions will be answered there. There's some weird strangeness with like what the C model or the D model is allowed. Sometimes they're not allowed certain propeller lengths, whereas other models are. It's all very strange, And if you're worried about it, just remember that your local FAA governing body is not going to know any more details about this than you are, so just don't stress about it. I get kind of a little tired of the nitpickiness and any niche interest. This is me pontificating, but just fly your airplane, be safe, don't fly with propellers that are dangerous, but your airplane isn't going to fall apart. How dare I have that opinion? But whatever. If you want to be a stickler for details, go into the type certificate document, read what's allowable, and abide by that. Or fly with whatever you've got. Who really cares? I don't care. Just have fun and be safe. Future bin out. So the main difference is, if you remember in the previous video, and I don't have great, let me shine some light in here. So in the previous video, you may remember, I'll kind of link that, you had the hydraulic prop system. This is the electric prop system, but essentially you have this little motor. I don't know if I have a better view of it back here. I do. I'm talking about this on the wrong side. Okay, so right here is the electric motor. Pretty cool. And that has a little gear that then drives these little gears that drive the pitch change mechanism, changes the blade between fine or high RPM and coarse pitch and low RPM. So that's how these were originally designed. They have this little mounting plate. The whole apparatus mounts there. Every 250 hours, you're supposed to take them off and lube the pitch change bearing. Those can wear out. Also, these originally came as a constant speed option, where it would actually had a governor on it that would, no matter if you pitched up or pitched down, picked up airspeed or lost airspeed, the propeller would adjust to maintain your RPMs constant. Most everyone at this point has discontinued those governors because it would tend to wear the pitch change bearings. They don't make the pitch change bearings anymore, so the constant hunting for RPMs in cruise would actually lead to the pitch change bearing wearing out. If you run it in just manual, which means you just set the RPM and then leave it, and it's essentially a fixed prop until you change to a different RPM setting with the little switch inside the cockpit. If you do that, you will not really wear out your pitch change bearing. So there is that. Okay, so Lou Gage, watch my video. You may recognize him from the first video. He's the author of the Owning and Maintaining the E-Series Bonanzas book that I referenced in the previous video. I will reference again in this video. He wanted to clarify that when I was talking about these oil tanks and how the external oil tank, how the oil will leak back into the case. So when you check the oil cold, it will read lower. For instance, this thing is reading 6.5 or so. It should be about 7.5 once I run it, but this thing has sat for a couple of weeks without flying, and so that residual oil has leaked back into the case. He wanted me to clarify that it's not the oil check valve that is leaking near the oil screen. It is apparently some bearings in the engine. Again, I am not a mechanic, an E-Series engine mechanic. I can do average wrenching work here and there. I'm just talking about the general idea. So for all functional purposes, it doesn't matter where the oil leaks. All that matters is just knowing that when you check the oil, know that it's going to read lower than it would after it has gotten hot and all of the hot oil is back into the oil tank. And you want to check it pretty quickly after shutdown. Otherwise, it's going to already, especially hot oil, is going to move really quickly past any gaps in the bearings or wherever it is that the oil is leaking down from. Again, do I not know exactly how the oil system works? No, I don't know, but I know enough to fly the airplane to check my oil. Lou Gage insists that you shouldn't even check the oil cold. That to me sounds ridiculous. You should at least check and make sure that there is oil on the chain. Okay, there should be some oil. It's not all leaking back. Maybe if it sat for a whole year, all of that could leak back. But if it's only sat for a week or so, you should at least have oil. I would not advise taking off and flying without at least verifying that you have some oil in the engine. So that kind of clarifies that little deal there. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the lightning holes here. I don't know why they call them lightning holes, but essentially the strut piston dealy bobber sits inside the frame. Water, if you're flying in the rain or just sitting on the ramp or whatever, moisture can get in here and Lou Gage says there's nowhere that water can sit kind of down here, and there's no way for the water to escape, and you can end up with corrosion there. They take these off and overhaul them, and they find moisture and corrosion down at the bottom. I agree that is definitely a possibility. I will say this engine leaks so much that I bet if you opened up this strut, all you would find is just gunky, oily mess in there, because this thing leaks so much oil. So it's almost self-lubricating. Maybe it can corrode. Again, this thing hasn't been overhauled in 30, 40 years, so who knows what they'll find. If you want to, there's a guy on Beach Talk who makes cool little rubber seals and seals all this up so that you don't get water in there sitting and corroding out the strut bore. That's fine. Again, I agree that that's probably a thing that can happen, but like, are we going to plug every single little tiny hole anywhere that there could be magnesium? I mean, moisture is going to get in if you're flying in the rain or whatever. So obviously that would be a great thing if you want that, but I also know a lot of people who don't have them and their struts don't just fall apart. So there's definitely a difference between Ben Weeks' Bonanza pilot and his methods, and maybe what the optimal, perfect Lou Gage acolyte, for lack of a better term, how they're going to operate their airplane. I am not to that level. Okay, I'll admit it. I'm kind of maybe the cheapo, junky type of owner. But again, your own preference. He wanted me to mention that. I will mention it. I have a lot of respect for Lou Gage. His book is awesome. Cover those up if you don't want moisture to get in there. Hasn't been a problem for us. Doesn't mean it's not a problem for other people. That covers that. All right, so I wanted to take a quick opportunity to explain kind of tip tanks. My dad's Bonanza is equipped with the Osborne. They originally Britain tip tanks. They're 20-gallon tip tanks, 20 on each wing. Then they sold out to Osborne, who then sold out to, I believe, Gammy. Now they are Gammy 20-gallon tip tanks. These are gravity feed, so they actually run all the way to a separate fuel selector that runs into that separate fuel selector has a left and right position that runs into the aux tank position. So when you have the main fuel selector in the aux tank position, you can then select between left and right, and it will feed directly to the engine. Some of the later style, like the DeShannons, actually use a transfer pump that pump the fuel into the main tanks. I believe I've not run those types, so correct me if I'm wrong there. It's my understanding that the DeShannons use transfer pumps and you still run off of the main tank. The important thing to note with these that are gravity feed is that they feed to the engine. They still run that 3 gallons per hour back to the left main tank, as I mentioned in the previous video. So just keep that in mind. But these are very handy. These actually give 100 pound. The STC that this has, as one of the older STCs, gives 100 pounds of extra useful load. It's extra gross weight, and you do not have to have fuel in them. The later STC, and I think the one offered by Gammy now, gives 150 pounds, but you have to have 6.25 gallons of fuel in each tank to use that extra gross weight increase. So that's just a fine little detail, something to consider. I think Gammy was talking about trying to get change the STC to allow the 150 extra pounds of gross weight directly into the cabin without having to carry any fuel in the tip tanks. But to my knowledge, I spoke to them a year or so ago, and at that point they had not quite moved forward with that STC. So that's the tip tanks. Okay, real quickly, I'm going to go ahead and discuss the fuel selector differences here. As I mentioned with the tip tanks, you have this extra fuel selector. It's currently pointing towards the right tip tank, and so that is how you select between the right and left tip tank. On these tip tanks, you cannot run both. You have to run them one at a time. So I usually run like 30 minutes per tip tank. Do that for about an hour, and then after running maybe half an hour on the left tank, the left main tank, then I'll run on the tip tanks maybe half an hour on the left, half an hour on the right, back to the left for another half hour, and then back to the left and right tip tanks, run them dry. A future Ben is back. Yet another error that Ben Weeks' Bonanza pilot made when he was making this video however many months ago, because I never get videos out. So, you will notice, or you may not notice, but the fuel selector, I don't know if you can read it because in the little tiny window that I'm editing this in, I can't tell whether that says right on that little secondary red arrow or not, but that is actually the right tip tank fuel selector knob. For some reason, this fuel system has two red knobs. The left fuel selector knob is kind of behind the main fuel selector knob, so you can't really see it in this picture, and you can't hardly see, well, you can't see any of that when you're flying. So just make note of that. Your fuel selector system is probably different unless you have this exact type of tip tanks. But just so you know, you do not turn the right fuel selector between right and left to feed from the right and left tanks. You turn it between perpendicular and, I guess, parallel with the tank. Either direction will allow it to feed, which is kind of weird, but if you were to point that towards the left tip tank, it would still feed from the right tank. If you were to turn it towards the front or rear of the airplane, it would stop feeding. And then the left tank also. So technically, I think you can actually run both of these tip tanks at the same time. I've never really tried to see if they feed evenly, but I think theoretically, if you had the right tip tank fuel selector pointed towards the right tank, the left tip tank fuel selector pointed towards the left tank, you would be feeding from both tanks simultaneously. I don't know, I just run them one at a time, and I may or may not have actually forgotten that the left tank existed for a while, and I just left it on the left side, and then I was just feeding, alternating between turning the right tip tank on and off. So, you know, whatever. I didn't die, so there's that. But these fuel systems are complicated. You know, you gotta watch them. That's why everyone's scared of these Bonanzas. Oh man, watch out for the fuel system. So, you know, just your friendly neighborhood Bonanza pilot that can't even manage his own fuel system in the airplane he's been flying for 5 years. Future bin out. This is the that fuel selector that I was mentioning in the last video. This is that T-style where you lift it up and you pump up and down, and then to change tanks, like right now it's pointing to the left tank, you can feel a little arrow. You can't see it very well. There's an arrow right there. Point to the left and go forward to aux. Okay, notice that this has a different position, and the last airplane aux was towards the rear. This one has aux towards the front, and off is in the rear. And then you can click that over to the right. You should be able to kind of hear the clicking that the airplane makes. Okay, so that's the fuel selector. It's different. Just make sure when you have it up, you still have it locked in. Make sure you stow it when you are done, when you have it selected on your tank. So that's kind of the differences you'll see between the two Bonanzas. That has the early style pump. The D model from the last video has the lever pump from before. Okay, otherwise, other differences, this has the single throwover yoke. There's a little thingy-majigger thing here. You lift that up, and you can actually, sorry about that, you can lift this, pull it up, and then the whole yoke will actually swing over. It has an upper position, which is the one I prefer and my dad prefers, and then there is a lower position. That's some people, but it doesn't give you a whole lot of space between your legs and the yoke, so when you're doing barrel rolls and stuff, it kind of gets in the way. So I prefer the upper position here. You'll notice we have this beautiful white that definitely matches the eggshell white here. That definitely isn't an eyesore. We had recently repainted that. This has a little trim wheel. Not all of them have it, but say you have like a left wing that's dropping a little bit, you can turn this, and that will it's a trim inside the actual aileron itself, instead of using the little tabs out on the wing tips. Okay, here's what we're going to talk about real quickly. This is just an example. Let me kind of scan down the piano keys. You can see how they are different than the previous airplane. And this is the little circuit breaker box I was talking about that some airplanes have, some of the early ones. And this would be an example. See, far on the left you have battery generator there. So there's definitely differences between the earlier and later Bonanzas. Okay, here, this is something my dad had mentioned that I should talk about. This is the emergency shutoff for the firewall. So if you had a fire in the engine compartment, you would want to pull this out so that you can shut off the smoke and stuff from getting into the cabin, so you don't die of smoke inhalation. And okay, another thing my dad wanted to show. I'm gonna have to really kind of get down here to show you guys this. Okay, rudder pedals, a mess. There's the it's actually the voltage regulator for the generator. This airplane has the generator, not the alternator. But right over there, you can see that little door thing that opens. Oh, it's so hard to... Okay, sorry about that. Right here, this little door that opens and closes. That is where your like cabin heat comes through. So in the summertime, when you want it to be cool, you might want to just shut that. Otherwise, heat, even with the cabin heat off, it will still let some heat through. It gets really hot in the summertime. So shut those off in the summer. In the wintertime, like it is now, we leave those open so we can get that nice toasty air. Okay, other thing to show on these rudder pedals. Okay, so if you're a really tall guy, my dad's 6'8", it's going to be sometimes hard to fit very well in these Bonanzas. The seat backs are kind of adjustable. In these early Bonanzas, you have to adjust it with like a bolt. You can't like adjust it in flight, but you can if you're a tall guy. You can usually set the seat back far enough to where you're comfortable. In addition to that, you've got these little adjustable things on your rudder pedals that they can adjust forward. It doesn't change much, but that's forward. It actually comes forward a couple inches. It's a lot easier for like my mother-in-law, who is shorter, to get on the brake pedals. So just know there's at least two positions, and we keep them in the back position because we're taller guys. So that's something for tall people who are concerned whether they can fit or not in the airplane. You can just adjust the pedals. That will help. So look at yours, and maybe you need to adjust them. The other thing I was supposed to talk about on the last video that I did not talk about that is super, super important is the trim wheel. This is the trim wheel for the Bonanzas and for the early Bonanzas. And right here is the trim indicator. Okay, black is like down, ground, white is sky. So if you have it kind of black on the bottom, white on the top, that's like neutral trim. It's hard to read on this one. Some of the other ones are clear to read. But essentially, white on the top of the line, black on the bottom of the line is like neutral trim. It's going to be different than your like Pipers and stuff that will have the trim wheel up on like the roof. It's not very intuitive. I always had trouble with those, understanding which was like nose down and which was nose up trim. These make a lot more sense to me. And essentially, if you roll the wheel forward, it will roll the nose forward, pitch the nose down. If you scoop up so roll it backwards towards you, it's going to lift the nose up. So to me, that makes sense. Like, oh, I'm lifting the nose up. Oh, I'm scooping it forward. And so the nose is going down. Reset that to neutral. So that's the trim wheel. Just be aware of that. This actually has a labeled, you can see lean. So that would be an example of the mixture actually being labeled. Here, okay. So this is the electric prop, right? So here we have the high RPM position. It springs back to neutral, so there's high RPM. Here is low RPM. And then here would be the pitch control. This is no longer connected, but this is how you control your RPMs. And then you can lock it back over if you were concerned about bumping that or whatever. Also, I found out the other correction. The little push button here in the last video, I didn't know what that was. That's a primer button, is what I was informed. We don't use a primer. They're stupid. They're a pain. You don't need them. I kind of already talked through the start procedure on these airplanes. So whatever. If you have it, great. You don't really need it. People confuse the little primer lines for like a fuel injection system, and it's not. Those just shoot a little fuel into the cylinders, make starting easier, allegedly. Okay, let me talk a little bit more about I talked about the hot start and cold start. Don't worry, I am not going to talk through that again. I just wanted to clarify, Lou Gage wanted me to clarify that the reason we do a hot start, and he actually does not like the full throttle method for hot start. I don't like it either, unless you have flooded it, okay? So you accidentally pumped, you need to clear the carburetor so you can do half or full throttle or something like that. The reality is you should be able to do it 3/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch, whatever. 2-3 turns like I was talking about. For a hot start as well, you just again have to get on that pump and pump it quickly. So the reason is percolation. Okay, do you know what percolation is? I didn't know what percolation was, but I googled it, and that means it's like where the fuel is boiling. So you shut down, you had fuel going to your carburetor. You'd think you could just start back up and get the fuels right there and fly the airplane. The problem is it actually percolates, which is like boiling and evaporating, and so you have oil evaporation in the super hot engine compartment, and you end up with all the fuel that would be in like the intake and carburetor system being essentially burned away, evaporated away, and that is why you still have some fumes in there, so you can fire it up on the fumes, but then you don't have liquid fuel, and that can actually boil all the way back in the line, so you can end up with a pretty far distance you have to go before you can to pump fuel before it actually gets up to the carburetor. That's why we have kind of that tricky hot start procedure where you are firing it on the fumes and then pumping really quick to try to get the liquid fuel up into the carburetor. Hopefully that was a better explanation. Maybe Luke Gage will approve of that. Who knows? But that is how that works. If I didn't explain it well in the last video, you can watch that. I belabored that point a lot. So that was a clarification I was going to make. Okay, I almost neglected to mention the parking brake. So right here to the right of... Why didn't I have a better light system? To the right of your control column, this is your parking brake. You have to like pull it forward and then kind of pump up the brakes, and then it will lock in. I don't know why you even need a parking brake. I never use this. It stays forward. Don't allow that to get bound up, and it can be really annoying. People can try to like put your airplane away, like the line guys can be trying to roll your airplane back into the hangar, and you have this set and it gets stuck. So just be aware of that. If you ever have trouble, like you're trying to, or like you just started your airplane up and you're trying to go taxi to the runway and the airplane won't move even though you're full throttle, means that this accidentally got pushed forward or whatever. So just watch that. Be aware that that's there. I forget that they even exist. I was just in Amber's straight 35 the other day, and I was like trying to taxi. I was like, why won't this thing move? The brake had worked its way on somehow. So be aware of that. I almost forgot to mention that. Okay, so real quickly, another thing I should talk about, I kind of mentioned those fuel doors, or sorry, not the fuel doors, what am I talking about? I mentioned the cabin heat doors, those little small doors down at the co-pilot and pilot's feet that need to be open for cabin heat. You should somewhere on your airplane panel have a little cabin heat. You pull that open, that should allow heated air from the exhaust system that uses a muffler and a heat exchanger. Should pull the hot air off the exhaust system, and that will blow into your cabin for heat, for cooling. Okay, some airplanes do not have any real cooling system other than there's like vents in the wing that blow in like on a side vent. This airplane has the later style swamp cooler. You actually fill it with water, have some element things in it that does evaporative cooling, and it's supposed to give you nice almost air conditioning. I've heard they don't work super great. It's hard to find the membrane things to go in the swamp cooler, so we actually have all those out, and we just run ram air from up above the cabin, and it blows out through these vents. That is controlled by this little cabin air thing here. I think this is closed, and you have to like twist it loose. That's open, so that would allow air to blow in, and then it's cold winter time, so we keep that shut and kind of latched in. Some will have it like Stanley's, my brother's airplane has it down here. There's a cabin air, runs the cable all the way up somehow to open that. So that's your air conditioning system. Let's see, the other thing to talk about in here would be your emergency windows. So this is super important. This is also an example. There's a third window. Okay, the D model only had originally they came with 2 windows. Later models added a third window. They have longer third windows. It's a preference thing. I kind of like they call it the opera window, the little small third window. I like that. I don't love the big long windows. Some people really think those look great. That's your preference. But these windows are designed for the backseat passengers in an emergency. Say they couldn't egress through the door if it got stuck or something. You can actually pull this little rod out here. Okay, I don't know why that cut off. So these actually have a design, this little orange pull rod thing here. If you pull that all the way out, it will actually take it off the hinge here, and you can actually lift the whole window, and the window opens like a trapdoor. Some of you have probably gotten in and out of those before. I have, like in the parts airplane, because the door was rammed against a wall where we keep the airplane in the hangar, and it is such a pain to get in and out of those. It is not great, but I guess if the airplane was on fire, you crashed, and you need to get out, you could probably make it pretty quick out of there. So those are on either side. So if that's important to know for emergency exit. Okay. There's one more thing I was going to talk about, and I think that's about everything for this hopefully shorter version of the demystifying the early Bonanzas. But that is, Lou Gage wanted to mention that his procedure is after shutdown. You can actually, when you've done all your stuff, you're walking around cleaning up the airplane at the end, checking things. He says that he actually will give about 2 to 3 pumps on the Wobble pump, and that will push fuel up into the carburetor, because remember I mentioned how we keep the mixture in so that the fuel system doesn't dry out. And he says, again, you don't have to do that. I haven't done that. I might start doing it. The hazard would be if you spun the prop, you just pump fuel up there. If somehow your mags got left on or your whatever, you could potentially, I guess, start the airplane by hand on accident. But that's supposed to just lubricate the fuel pump and the seals in the fuel pump and the seals in the carburetor. And potentially, he said you could maybe make your fuel system last 40 years instead of 20 years. So if you are interested in doing that, go right ahead. Otherwise, I think that is about everything I need to cover. That's kind of the differences. With the electric prop, sorry, let me clarify. High RPM, low RPM. How do you know that you're at full RPM? We actually have a prop light here that when you put the prop in high RPM all the way, it will turn on once it gets to the very end of the gear. Otherwise, that will just keep spinning the electric prop motor. And it'll run off the end of the last gear. There's a little stop there. It'll just keep running off, and it can actually grind down the very final gear. So some of them have, or most all of them should have a switch that once you get to the top or the final tooth, it will hit a little switch and it'll kill the motor. But you're still going to be sitting there wondering, like, oh, okay, are my RPMs back to normal? How do I know it's in high RPM? And you're just you're just holding this for no reason. So the light is actually helpful because it tells you you're at high RPM when you've gotten there, so you don't have to just hold the switch down forever. I don't know if that makes any sense, but point is, it's nice to have a little high RPM light that tells you, hey, we've been holding this for 10 seconds, now we're actually in high RPM. Otherwise, I could be there for 30 seconds. I'm like, oh, I think I'm in full, takeoff RPM, but I don't know. So there's a light. This isn't labeled. It needs to be labeled. There seems to be a trend here. Some of them have lights in different areas, whatever. Point is, it's nice with the electric propeller to have a little light that tells you, hey, I'm in high RPM. You don't need a low RPM light, because if the light's off, you are in some version of lower RPM. You're never going to get all the way to the lowest pitch unless maybe you're in like an emergency situation and you need the extra glide distance. Otherwise, I think that pretty much covers everything that I can think of and that I need to really mention before I go fly these airplanes. So I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching. I've gotten a really good reception in the last video, so you guys can watch this video as well. And part 3, we are going to go take that D model up, go do some flying. I'm going to talk through some of the procedures and speeds. People wanted me to talk about touch and goes, all kinds of procedures. We'll do all that. It'll be a fun video. We'll go flying. We'll have fun. Thanks a lot, guys. Like and subscribe if you enjoy this content, and I will see you guys in the next video.